I appreciate everybody coming out for lunch for me, and I guess this is the no free lunch, so you have to listen to me. But anyways, it is funny being a Cal lifer that I said I was going to come speak at Stanford, and of course a few people send me questions, what the heck are you doing? I said, well, it's because Stanford asked me to speak and Cal didn't. So. And actually, there is a funny story, though, about Qualcomm and Stanford, because in the early days, there was a consultant for one of our competitors who was a Stanford assistant professor, and he put out a thing saying that CDMA violated the laws of physics. So we always said, well, I guess it doesn't really work in the vicinity of Palo Alto, and unfortunately, it didn't actually work that well because of the bay and interference and stuff like that. But you know, we always would come up here and have people tell us that this CDMA technology really doesn't work that well, and anyways, it seems to have worked out okay. So, in any case, I'm going to talk to you about this born mobile concept that I used really as a theme of my CES speech, but take it in a little bit of a different direction. And by born mobile, what I really mean is not that I'm talking about just the people who were born in the existing generation that had mobile phones, but in fact, it seems like it's a human characteristic. I mean, it's all of us somehow have adapted to this notion of being able to have this little piece of plastic and metal and glass and silicon in our hands and touch it and get access to all the world's information, to each other. I mean, the degree to which that became so natural to all of us is really, I think, an amazing statement about human beings and the adaptability of human beings and sort of the transformational power of these kinds of technologies. And people really are addicted to these things. I mean, there's stats saying things like people look at their device 150 times a day. So feel free if you're here and you want to. I actually felt happy. A lot of times I come to a talk and the sign outside says, turn off your phone. And I'm like, no, please don't do that. So it just said silence your phone. And I'm perfectly fine if you want to send money to any of the operators who then pay us. So feel free. But in any case, this notion about born mobile, I think, also now applies to technology. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we see mobility as being a transformational technology for other industries as well. But maybe just start off by Qualcomm, because Qualcomm was born mobile also in the sense that it was started by people who had been together at a previous company, people who were experts in digital communications theory, and at the time, the Moore's Law hadn't gotten to the point where computation was cheap enough, and therefore in the previous company we used it for military and space communications. And it wasn't like they thought about it necessarily in Qualcomm. In fact, Qualcomm was started with no product in mind. It was just that they had this knowledge base. But Moore's Law decreased the cost of computation so much that military and space technology now became useful for commercial and consumer technology. In fact, with CDMA, people used to say things like, oh, you were going to have a van full of electronics to do this signal processing. And then the day I remember when we brought out our first mobile phone, and it was kind of a big chunky thing, of course, back then, but people were just blown away that you could do that. By the way, when we brought that out, at that same time, we had actually embedded the internet protocols in the phone. That was in the early 90s. So we started thinking about the wireless internet from the very, very beginning of the company, and I think that was a critical thing for us. The way the company works right now, the business model has been simplified from the early days. In the early days, we had infrastructure, we had a handset business that I actually ran, we invested in operators, we kind of used Motorola as our model. But we pared it down to really focusing on the creation of new technology and then embedding the technology into the chipsets. And so we really don't sell directly to the consumer, which is why we're probably the least known company of the size of market cap that we have, I think, in the world, because we just haven't focused on that. I always felt like if I could spend $1 on R&D and spend $1 on marketing, I knew what I was going to get for the R&D dollar, so I spent my money there. And I think Irwin had the same philosophy. Now, as time goes on, we're starting to become a little bit more marketeers. But in any case, we really focused in on creating technology, embedding it in, selling that through a B2B model into the wireless operators who then sold it to the end user. And it wasn't that we didn't think about the end user, but I think we've been somewhat famously unsuccessful in our direct sales to consumers, even with, our handset business was okay, but we didn't have a lot of competition at the time, and we really have just decided we're going to focus in on the things we do well, which is sell to operators, to handset manufacturers, and now increasingly to other partners. And the model works extremely well. It's very synergistic to have the licensing model and the chipset business together, because if you have ideas, if you have technology, and you embody that in patents, and you want to license those patents, well, the patents aren't valuable unless they're out in the market. And so the chipset business I look at as a distribution channel for ideas. And that's the way that we get the ideas out in the market, and that then makes them valuable. Conversely, for the chipset business, the licensing business allows us to invest very early in new technology. So we're often way ahead of the market in terms of investing in new technology, but we create a very good intellectual property position. We create a lot of enabling technology, and what that means for the chip business is that they generally get access to the latest technology early. And so and with a lot of background knowledge in it, and so they're able to beat their competitors to market with the latest technology. We're constrained very much in how these businesses talk directly to each other through various regulatory things and so forth, but they have these sort of additive effects, these synergistic effects, which I think work extremely well. And we spend a tremendous amount on R&D. We spend $4 billion in R&D, and a very substantial portion of it is R&D that doesn't generate revenue in the near term. So we're always kind of looking far out and saying, okay, we'll invest in the next new thing. And actually, we had a conversation earlier about a project that we have on building digital brains, and we were actually part of the announcement at the White House about the Brain Initiative. And this is definitely a far out project for us, and it's not huge in the scale of 4G and 3G research, but it's it's a substantial investment for us, and we're always looking at those kinds of things. What can we do in the future, and where are things going to go in the future? And so I'll give you some sense of that as we go on. But if you look at just mobile in general, I say it's going to be an enabling technology. I mean, it's already a fairly large business in the sense of mobile revenues are about $1.5 trillion. It's like 2% of GDP. I'm sure any of you who watch TV probably sick of the fact that I don't know, half the commercials are about mobile technology. But anyways, it's one of those industries that really has kind of almost come out of nowhere to take over a lot of the way that we live our daily lives. And my pitch for patents, which I know is not always certainly. The high-tech industry is divided in terms of how they look at patents, because some companies look at it as an input cost, and therefore they want to lower that, the cost of intellectual property. And other companies look at it as sort of their seed corn, and they want to protect it. And of course, we're both a product and a licensing company. We see the balance of it. But I would say to you, if there were radical changes to the patent system, I don't think Qualcomm would have become the company that it was, because we were a very small company going up against huge companies that were, would have just liked to have taken our intellectual property and not compensated us for it. And so I think the patent system is important. Of course, everybody dislikes being attacked by trolls and all those kinds of loaded words and concepts. But in general, I think the United States is an information and innovation economy, and other countries take their cues from what our government does. And when our government tries to lower the value of intellectual property, I don't think it does a good service for our economy. a lot of the patents now are actually focused on mobile technology. So there's a great deal of investment going on worldwide, but certainly in Silicon Valley and certainly in the US on mobile technology. And you can see the stat there in terms of 21% of patents granted by the PTO were in the first quarter of 12 were mobile related. I'll tell you another thing, because we were having a conversation about immigration too, that I think the number is something like 72% of Qualcomm's patents have a foreign-born inventor on them. It's a pretty amazing kind of stat. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, right? But the number is, it's roughly that number. Anyway, so where do I think things are going to go? And obviously one of the big issues that we have in the world, I mean, it's healthcare costs are bankrupting the developed countries, and the developing world doesn't have enough, and so it's really an issue. And if you look at the kind of spending that goes on in the United States on healthcare, it's I think 17% of GDP. A lot of it is associated with chronic conditions, managing chronic conditions. Mobile is going to, I believe, transform healthcare. And there are some stats that are amazing. I mean, there have been things that show that 45% reduction in mortality rates from just the notion of being able to monitor somebody who has some kind of a chronic condition or even acute conditions as well. And there have been a lot of studies now that have happened and show significant success rates with these. And we're working with a large number of companies, and San Diego happens to be a very big life sciences area as well, and it's really a nice coming together of the telecom industry and the life sciences people in this sort of mobile health. But really what we want to see is a global industry grow, and one of the things that we did recently was we put out a $10 million X Prize to build a tricorder. And hopefully we have Star Trek fans in here that know what a tricorder is. But anyways, that's the little box that they waved over the person to figure out whether they had some disease or something. And it is a global thing. There's over 200 teams have signed up to compete from around the world. And the idea is that we will use the latest in information technology and the latest in sensor technology and all this computing capability that's been built into these phone chips to actually do diagnosis of 15 diseases and compare it to a panel of doctors. And so this will help either lightly skilled healthcare workers in developing economies. It will help consumers sort of do the first screening in developed economies. I mean, I think the opportunity is interesting. And for us, what was important was we just wanted to find a catalyst. And I liken it a little bit to the coming of the iPhone, which to me was a catalyst for mainstream adoption of wireless internet. Because we had been doing it for a long time. It was there in your phone. Most of you didn't know that because you didn't care, you weren't using it. We didn't make it easy enough for you to use and so forth. But the iPhone came along and all of a sudden everybody, I used to go to parties a long time ago and say, I was working on the wireless internet, and people say, why do I want that? I make phone calls on my phone. Why do I want to get on the internet from my phone? And I don't get that question anymore. So I think the similar thing will happen in healthcare. And another thing that we'd like to see happen is that today when you have your phone, you feel connected with your friends and your family and your colleagues, not because you're necessarily talking to them at the time, but because you can. Because they have a phone, you have a phone, and you can connect with them whenever you want. And I think the same dynamic will happen with your healthcare provider in the future. It's not that your doctor will be watching you constantly, but if something bad happens, they can be noted. And then maybe I'll just end on this little segment by saying we're working with a researcher right now, and we're going to do some clinical trials around this. So these guys have come up with a chip that's very, very small. And the idea is that it would be injected into your bloodstream and essentially lodge in your wrist. And it can detect biomarkers floating in your blood that could tell you 2 weeks ahead of time that you're going to have a heart attack. So your phone rings, and that means you better go to the doctor. So we will have technology embedded in us. And people think that's weird, but even today, if you have a pacemaker or any other, embedded medical electronics, you have that. And in fact, these similar kinds of reduction in mortality rate have been shown for connected pacemakers too. That if you have a pacemaker that can be interrogated so that you don't have to go in the clinic to get it looked at, there's something like a 50% reduction in mortality rate. So this technology is coming. The harbingers of things like Nike fuel bands and Up and all these other things that people are wearing on it. But we're going to see this come together, and hopefully the policies in the developed world will support it. I have a belief that maybe this will happen in the developing markets first, and in fact it is already starting to happen in a big way in developing markets. Another area clearly where we need to make some disruption is in education, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here because so much work on online and non-traditional forms of education are being done at Stanford and in the Bay Area, and it just seems strange to me that we're teaching people in the way that they were taught 100 years ago, and if you take a book today, it always amazed me that like a physics book has a diagram of a physics experiment in it, when today, when you play Angry Birds, you have a whole physics simulator in that game. Why can't the kid just do the experiment themselves on their tablet and so forth? So I think this will happen. That, if we look at sort of the K through 12 opportunity, there's certainly a lot of resistance to mobile technology. People talk about kids cheating or things like that, or passing notes, being distracted, all these kinds of things. But we did, we have this program called Wireless Reach, which does it's corporate social responsibility kind of thing, and we use wireless technology for various areas of social benefit, and education was one of them. And we put a program into a school where the kids were in an algebra class, and we gave them smartphones with this particular software on them. And the kids improved their test scores by, I think it was 30%. Because what actually happened was not so much that the stuff that was being taught on the device was what was important, it was that the kids actually worked with each other. And so kids taught each other how they solved a problem. And so we've actually gotten a lot of traction with that now. And there's many different initiatives now going on, obviously, not only online but mobile. And we see the opportunity for this kind of technology to really spread education to a much broader, area of the world. If you think about developing countries, there's more people that have cell phones than have toothbrushes and running water and electricity and things like that. So if you can provide education over it, it certainly can make some tremendous benefits. And so we're focused in on that area as well. And I think there's a lot of other areas. I mean, clearly, mobile has already disrupted or enabled, however you want to look at it, entertainment, consumer electronics. I mean, we're doing a lot of stuff in transportation now. I mean, smart grid, there's a lot of opportunities in smart grid. So all these kinds of areas that are very interesting to people for a place to improve efficiency or improve services, there's a lot of opportunity there. But I think I just highlighted health and education because I just think they're so critical of areas to go make some innovation in. So what are the trends? So I'll now switch a little bit more towards the mobile industry, and what are the key trends? And the key trends that we're focused on are these three, which is this notion of redefining how computing is done. And I don't think that's very groundbreaking anymore. People see it already. You see that you're going mobile. I mean, we were talking earlier about do I carry a PC with me when I go on trips abroad, and I don't even carry a PC anymore at all. I only carry a tablet and a smartphone with me, and I mostly use smartphone. I think increasingly that's the way the world's going. I don't think that's any news here. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in that. We have this thing called the 1000x data challenge, and that comes from a conversation with NTT Docomo, where we were working at trying to improve the capacity of the systems by, say, 10 to 12 times. And they came in and said, no, we need 1,000 times. And we said, oh my God. And then we figured out how to do it, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about that. And then the third is the digital sixth sense, which what it has to do with is sort of the Internet of everything, that things around us will all be connected, and the phone will sit in the middle as a sort of a gateway, extending your five senses to another sense of you being able to detect what's around you in cyberspace that might be associated with a physical location you're in. So sort of the blurring of physical and digital, and so I'll talk to you a little bit about that. Starting off with computing, I mean, really what's happened is, a lot of things have come up from the bottom. So we talked, about Qualcomm market cap surpassing Intel. I won't make any statements about relative valuations of the company, but I will say that coming up from the bottom, focused in on power consumption, and then increasingly improving the capabilities of the processors to the point where our high-end processors basically have the same compute power that you have in your laptop. So, but very, very focused on low power consumption. That's what's driven our company. That's what's driven the smartphone industry. Smartphone sales in the third quarter were up 47% year over year. People say there's going to be 5 billion smartphones sold between 2012 and 2016. I mean, the numbers are pretty staggering because it really is such a global phenomenon. But what's happened now is that the things that we did on the smartphone are migrating to your your more full computing environment on the larger screen. And this is going to happen a lot of different ways. Right now, obviously, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have an iPad or some tablet, and so you do a lot of your computing now on that, and in addition to doing it on your smartphone. It used to be, I'd just say, how many of you do your email on your phone now instead of on your PC, which I think a lot of people did that on their BlackBerries and so forth. So this, it's not something that happened overnight. It's something that's been building for a very long time. But taking those things out and having, great screen quality, having very, very responsive devices, because you really have a very low tolerance when you touch the screen of your handset that it reacts quickly. I remember this from the very early days of mobile internet when we had a palm-based smartphone, and how frustrating it was just waiting for a web page to download. The same length of time that you would wait sitting at your desk, you wouldn't wait while you had it in your hand. So we focused very much on improving responsiveness. But the other thing that I always felt was when I had my PC and I had to go somewhere, my father was telling a story. We just came back from Africa, and he used to tell the story about how he used to have to unscrew the jack, the telephone jack, and wire in, and now everybody has Wi-Fi, even in safari lodges and so forth. So this notion of having connectivity, so your thing's always on, it's always connected, it's always synchronized. You sort of got used to that with a smartphone, and then when you went to your PC and it wasn't really that way, particularly for a laptop that was not connected, I think that was something that people saw. Now, it's getting solved in two ways. It's getting solved both over cellular, but I would argue right now a lot of it's going over Wi-Fi also. And so these two technologies are very complementary with each other. And then the kind of the weight, the size, the thinness, all those sort of attributes that we saw in the smartphone are now coming to the computing. And so it's probably not a surprise that you get stats like this, that smartphone shipments doubled PCs, and the trend really is in the direction of smartphones up and PCs relatively stagnant. And I think over time that trend will continue. Now, with that said, we're investing pretty heavily in larger screen computing. So when I say PCs, the line is quite blurred at this point. And I think what's been interesting to me is to see the sort of innovation that's happened on form factors, and now devices where I can pull the screen off of my laptop and it becomes a tablet, and those kinds of things that are going on. I think they very much blur the line. It will be more about where you are and what task it is that you have to do, whether you have a keyboard, and is that the thing that delineates between a tablet and a smartphone. I mean, it's sort of hard to make a distinction anymore. But in any case, this trend of coming up from those kind of characteristics I was talking about, I think those are the really important things. The other thing is that, kind of along the theme of mobile being an enabling technology, the fact that the mobile industry has spent so much money on the volume of sales that you have has driven a lot of R&D investment to improve functionality and lower cost, size, and power of the devices. And then we had this time, which we're still in, where functionality is being subsumed into the smartphone. So your camera and your various entertainment devices and your nav system and all, all of these things are subsumed into the device. But now with that, the investments that cause that to happen, now these chips go out into other things. So computing is one, but the smart TV is another. And I had a really interesting experience at the CES show where I was very much a non-believer in smart TVs because I always felt like, okay, I have a TV and now I'm going to run smartphone applications on it. Why would I do that? I just couldn't understand how that was going to be compelling, and the ones I'd used hadn't been compelling. But what actually is very fascinating is we showed an application which augmented TV. And what it was you took the broadcast signal, in this case it was NASCAR, shrunk it down to a little bit smaller piece of the screen, left some border, and now me with my tablet, my friend with their tablet or their smartphone or whatever, we could post the things that we wanted to look at together up on the big screen that we were all looking at, and then ourselves we could look at whatever we were looking at on our own device as well. So we had both a communal experience and a private experience. I think that kind of a model actually is something that will be interesting and may make smart TVs happen. But really, you kind of look at it, probably the thing that differentiates all these things, and obviously we accentuate it by lining it up this way, is the size of the screen. And so it's more going to be about the form factor and the utility of it and the task, as I said earlier. And finally, maybe to just say, the things that it has allowed us to do as a company are tremendous. So we were known originally, when I took over, we were known as the CDMA company. I tried to expand us to be known as the wireless technology company. We made an acquisition early on to do that in a totally different technology called OFDMA, which is the basis of many of the 4G systems. But then it was really after that, this whole notion of the phone being the center of not just communications, but computing and entertainment and productivity led us to put other stuff into the phone. And so what that's meant is that each one of these areas is now a vector for us to compete on. And so in the early days, we said, we can be okay at whatever it was, at CPU, or we could be okay at graphics. Now we try and be world-class on all of these areas, and we actually get our chips sold into other devices because we can beat our competitors on most, if not all, and in a couple of cases, if we're behind in one area, we're ahead in a bunch of others. And so it really has increased the bar for the competitors to try and keep up this notion of integration. And of course, for the consumer, it's great because they're getting more functionality at lower cost, lower size, lower power consumption, and so forth. So it's very much a win-win for us. But it's given us a tremendous opportunity. This wireless internet becoming mainstream was just a huge, huge opportunity for the company. Now, what it also means, though, is we get to this 1000x challenge, which is basically if you double demand for data rate, data capacity of your device every year for 10 years, that's 1,000. So kind of that's where the number, I think, came from. But it really has been doing that. And in the cases where I've gone to mobile operators and they've said to me, I don't see that demand on my network, I usually say to them, that's because your marketing department is protecting you because they're using price elasticity to keep the demand on the network down. What that means is that your consumers, your customers, are paying to their pain point. They want more, but they're only paying as much as they can possibly stand to pay, and they hate you for it. So we're going to fix that problem by giving you much, much more capacity. And the way that it works is there's a number of ways, and I'm not going to get too technical, but let me just say there's a few different things you can do. You can improve the radio technology. We have gotten to a theoretical limit, roughly, on any individual radio link. And so it's less about the radio technology these days and more about how the network is laid out. And I'll say that a little bit more about that. Obviously, one of the things you need to do is get more spectrum. So we've been huge proponents of that, and I know there are people in the room who have been helping us out, so thank you. And then it's this topology of the network. So cells that will be inside, much more like a Wi-Fi access point than the traditional network. And the best way I think to put it is that a cellular network today is what I'll call outside in, meaning they put a big tower up outside and they transmit enough power to try and penetrate into the building so you get your cellular coverage here. The future of the network is going to be it'll still have inside out, but it'll also be outside, or sorry, it'll still be outside in, it's going to be inside out as well. And in fact, you get much, much more capacity in the network when you put small base stations near to the devices, because once you've optimized the radio link enough, the next thing you do is just get the transmitter and the receiver close to each other, and you get higher data rates that way. And so that's the next thing. And it turns out that people actually, when I don't know how many of you have used a 4G phone, but if you had one early on, you got very high data rates because you were pretty much the only one on it. And then when your friends got on it, they were slowing you down. So in the future, we actually think that there'll be maybe even a one-to-one relationship between number of cell sites and number of phones. And when I say that, then you start thinking, oh my God, how expensive is that going to be? Because it's like $100,000 to put in a cell site, and not because the equipment costs that much, because the real estate and the provisioning and all these other things that you do cost so much money. And so what we focused on was this idea of using the same integration we did on the phone side, but use it for a base station. That's a base station, and that's a quarter. So you can see the size of it. So a base station literally will be a little thing that you'll plug into the wall, and it will give you coverage in that room, and you probably will be the only one using the entire sector of coverage there, and you'll get very, very high data rates. But in addition, what will happen is that the coverage from there will actually leak out into the street and create a network also outside. And this works amazingly well. We have this set up at Qualcomm. We have drive routes where we drive around in a van, and we used to do that with our normal outside-in technology. Now we've just put 7 of these in buildings in Qualcomm, attach them to the company Ethernet, and boom, it just works the same way. It's really fundamentally amazing. And these things will cost less than $100. So there's a 1,000x reduction in the cost too. And so that's a fundamental thing. Now, one of the big switches that's going to happen from that is the fixed line operators who have been so disparaged are going to become much more important, because now it's the connectivity of that device to the rest of the network. And I kind of think of it now as the fixed line. If you think about watering a lawn, the fixed line network is the hose getting the water to the sprinkler, and the wireless network's just the sprinkler, kind of getting those bits all sort of spread out all over the place. And so that's the future. And these devices and cell sites will be built into different consumer electronics products, or you'll just get them from your operator. And over the next 5 years, that's the way the network's going to be. And so if you live in an area where people complain about having cell towers, there's hope for you. Okay, let me just go on to the digital sixth sense. So I talked about this a little bit. Basically what's happening is cost is getting driven down of all these devices to the point where connectivity, and maybe not cellular connectivity, but some kind of connectivity will be built into all things around us, whether it's the mic I'm wearing, the projector for the screen, the speakers, the light switches, the HVAC here, I mean, the retail, store down the way. I mean, all of these things are going to have connectivity built into them. And the question is, how do you know that? How do you interact with those things? And my answer is, I think the phone will be the thing that acts as your proxy, that will tell you what in the world around you you can get services from, or content from, or make connections to, and then it'll allow you to control that as well. And so we call that the digital sixth sense. And as a little illustration, I should say, it may be that it uses augmented reality. So augmented reality is a technology where you use a lot of processing and computer vision in the phone, so that when it takes a picture with its camera and you're looking at it on your screen, it's actually compositing virtual objects into your real-world view. And in fact, it could do that in a way that's photorealistic, so it would look like the thing was actually sitting there. And it doesn't jitter around because it's locked in place using computer vision technologies. But what it'll do is it'll tell you various things. Like I could drag and drop to that screen, which is the screen in my living room. And we've done this demonstration already. I have something on my phone. I point it at the screen. I just drag it from the screen of my phone onto that sort of outlined area, and boom, now it's showing up on my TV. Or we did a demonstration at the last Mobile World Congress. We built out a whole house with, alarm clocks and coffee pots and washing machines and dryers and all these kinds of things. And you could just stand away from them and actually pop up a user interface on your device. So the device became sort of a universal user interface for you, and it let you know what things were controllable and what weren't. And you might say, I don't want that complexity, but let me give you a sort of a thing I'm pretty sure everybody's dealt with. You go to a foreign country, you can't read the signs. In the future, you'll hold your phone up, it will translate the sign, put it back in the place where that sign was, and allow you to click on it. So the world becomes a clickable place. So now, you can think about all the implications of that, but there's a lot of implications to that. And so we believe, this digital sixth sense and this Internet of Everything concept and all the things that I talked about earlier in terms of mobile being an enabling technology for other industries, that's really the future of the interface that now we've gotten so used to. So with that, I think I will go to, did I talk long enough? Because I can talk longer, but...
So you're willing to take questions?
I'm willing to take questions, yeah.
Okay, so we have a question right here. Here comes the mic.
So we're talking a lot about the phone. Could you talk to us a little bit about the Google Glass and the other things people are wearing on their wrists and other ways of communicating with the wireless world than looking down at a screen?
So I spent a lot of time on glasses early on, and so we're not so good at selling stuff to consumers, as I said earlier, and it was hard for me to know whether people were going to be willing to do something like that. So we believe in that model. I call it the continuous interaction model, where you actually are online all the time and you're getting stuff back and forth. And it may turn out that Google Glass is phenomenally successful because they convince everybody to wear a little thing, or it may be that these smartwatches and other body-worn devices are the thing. And we're sort of working on both sides of it. I mean, I don't really need to make a choice of which one I think is going to happen, but we've definitely made some investments. We have a display business investment where we're building displays that are color, always on. We're not quite there yet to have the same beautiful color as Samsung's OLED display, so it's not in the market yet, but we're getting there. And the notion is that your device will, instead of being off, like we all look at our phones right now, the screen's off, and you say, well, that phone actually is on because it's exchanging information with the network, it's synchronizing my email, my Facebook, my calendar, it's doing stuff, I just don't know it's doing it. I think in the future that'll change. And so I think this notion of continuous interaction, whether it's in glasses, on your wrist, in your ear, on your existing phone that you put down on the table, I mean, in the ambient environment around you because there's a screen that gets a notification from something because you're watching, it's just going to be all around you. And so I think it's going to be consumer choice, and I don't claim to be the guy to figure that one out. So we'll build the enabling technology for that, and other people will build the way that the consumer adopts it.
I have a question over here. Yeah.
Could you comment a little bit about personal security and just privacy, which are, we usually talk about privacy, but we don't talk a lot about security and what your thinking is and what you do inside the company to work in those areas. So
when you say, you mean cybersecurity or like physical security?
Well, cybersecurity is sort of,
okay.
I really think about the individual.
So if I'm walking down the street, I don't want to be attacked by somebody?
Well, because I know where you are.
Oh, I see.
If I'm good enough, I can find out where you are at all times, and then maybe the person at the store knows that I'm there, and he doesn't like me.
So we have an interesting technology that we're getting ready to launch, which can give you anonymity at the same time as allow you to have connectivity with, if you walk into a store, you can get offers from them. They don't know who you are necessarily who's walked in the store. Now, given cameras and face recognition and stuff like that, they may figure that out some other way, but they won't figure it out from the wireless technology that you're carrying around. And I think we cared a lot about this from the very, very earliest days in the company. It's kind of funny. We built a system for messaging to long-haul truckers, and it was a little satellite dish that sat on top of the cab, and it had, even pre-GPS, we had figured out a way to do position location because you needed it to do load dispatching and so forth. And we were very worried that the truckers would see it as Big Brother, and for the most part, they accepted the fact that they were known, that the dispatcher knew where they were in exchange for the fact that they could drive more hours and be more safe and make more money and so forth. So those kinds of trade-offs are hard to know how people do it, and I think people of our generation can't understand why our kids are so willing to put as much out on the internet as they are, but apparently they are. And I kind of look at it, there's a spectrum where my opinions I'm willing to freely share, and my personal financial and health information, I try and keep it as private as possible, and other things are somewhere on that spectrum. And so I guess I would answer that by saying we're trying to build technologies that allow you to have some degree of anonymity and some degree of protection. I would also say that if you believe that anybody's systems are secure given a sufficient enough attack, you're probably wrong. I mean, I think Iran proved that. So one of our ways of dealing with cybersecurity at the company is that we just run really, really fast. So it's hard for somebody to steal something from us, create a product, and beat us to market with that product. And by the time they get their product, we're already on to the next one. Now, that works for us in an industry that's changing rapidly. It's probably, there are other things where you own something and you really don't want it to get out, and that's tough. I think, when you think about things like critical infrastructure, it's kind of a scary thing, and I think it's an emerging area. From a product standpoint, we are building trusted computing environments and various kinds of hardware into the phone to try and protect these things. And so I think there's a great deal of focus on it, but it's not perfect, and it's never going to be perfect.
Yeah, David.
How much of a problem is patent infringement for you in China? And if it is a big problem, have you tried to quantify dollar amounts associated with loss of income yearly?
Yeah, so generally it is not an issue for us. I think it's also a benefit of the model where we're both supplying chips and technology, and so if somebody's unhappy with you on one side or the other, they're still happy with you on the other side, and therefore they keep the relationship going and you solve your issues. And so China is our largest source of revenue. The one place where we've had some issues is there's a technology called TDS-CDMA, which was touted to be a homegrown Chinese technology. It certainly used aspects of technology that we created, and in certain situations we have a hard time collecting on that. In other situations we don't, and the predominant reason for that, I would argue, is it didn't become a global technology, and therefore there wasn't a lot of leverage for us to go and drive a deal when people felt like they were, companies felt like they were somehow protected. If they wanted to sell into the global market, they didn't feel so free to do that. And they signed licenses, and they paid those licenses, and they gave us audit rights and all sorts of stuff. And so I think we're in a good position. I would also say that, I believe that a big piece of it is that we have to continue to create value. So when we get paid for the intellectual property, the way I look at it is aggregated R&D for other people. And so if we're delivering the next new technology to a company that then they can create a new product that they're early into the market and they get a higher margin on the new product, then they have an incentive to stay paying us so that we give them good R&D. And if we don't do that, then I can understand why they'd be upset at paying. So far it's been okay. We've had some glitches, and we'll see. It's still an ongoing thing for sure.
Yeah, right here. Here it comes.
Paul, could you tell us, please, a little more about your connection with the Brain Institute?
Yeah, so I think, does everybody know what the Brain Initiative is? So the Obama administration made one of their big initiatives to go and map the brain, and there's a lot of benefits to things like Alzheimer's and other brain-related disorders. But the things that we've been working on are really about mimicking the design of the human brain to build processors that can do things that traditional processors can't do. And it's a very, very highly parallel system, as you probably know. And one thing you may not know is that a lot of the information is encoded in the timing of pulses that come from one neuron to the other. And when they align with each other at the next neuron down the chain from different places in your brain. And so you have this time-based sort of encoding of information. It's really fascinating how the thing works. So for us, we don't do the wet science. We're not in there looking at brains, but what we think we'll be able to do is provide tools so that if a researcher figures something out in terms of the way a system is in the brain, a structure in the brain is derived, we can now build it into silicon, and then they can see whether it works the way they expect. And before you dismiss this as, Terminator or stuff like that, I was very skeptical when we started the project. And we built an artificial retina, and it had local properties that caused it to respond to optical illusions in the same way as your eye does. And I said, okay, I get that. This local property has this, and I can see why that happens, and fine, I didn't get too worried about it. They put a layer of cells behind that, and then it started detecting features. And then another layer of cells, and it detected corners and orientations and things like that, and a few layers now. And we have a little robot that's it's a camera, and it sits on a robot, and it has a vision system, modeled after a mammalian vision system, has a motor control system. And if you're standing in its vision, meaning the camera can see you and you move, it looks at you in a very biological way. It's very freaky. So it's like one of those things where you're not sure whether, what are the right things to be doing. But we're sort of on the path right now we hope to build a cat brain, actually, in the next few years. So we'll see whether that works, and so far it does work. There are certainly all sorts of interesting aspects to it, but relative to the Brain Initiative, it's really this idea that if people discover the structures, then we can implement them in a way that's much easier to see, because it's easier to see what one neuron does in our systems than it is in the wetware. So, anyways.
My wife wouldn't like me to say this, but our cat's pretty dumb, and I would suggest you work on her first.
Oh. Can't make it more friendly.
The cat or the wife, sorry. I'm interested, when you're designing solutions for the United States and Europe, you're assuming a lot of fiber. It's already been laid out. So for countries like China and India, in Africa, they can be able to bypass the investment in the fiber, or what's going to happen there to develop to deliver the same solutions?
Yeah, so there's less fiber than we would like for sure. And these small cell things, the way that they'll work is that it'll be backhaul limited. Whatever backhaul you have, that's what that local area kind of connectivity it'll get. And then the systems will actually look for the best connectivity to use. So they'll optimize based on whatever's around them. But for the specific question, so we own Spectrum in India. We bought it because we were trying to influence the technology direction in India for their 4G systems. And it's certainly an issue there. It's a higher frequency band, which, by the way, works quite well for small cells, but doesn't really work that well for the outside-in sort of method. And they don't have a lot of fiber, although the Reliance guys are talking about rolling out more fiber. But I think what's going to happen is that we'll actually use the cellular technology in kind of an outside-to-outside system, and then inside we'll use a small cell for either 3G, 4G, or Wi-Fi connectivity inside. And so, yeah, I think they will be able to do a fair degree of leapfrogging. And then what will probably happen, similar to what we thought would happen when we did just telephony using cellular technology, that people will go figure out where the hotspots are, and then they'll they'll send fiber there and do stuff like that. So I think it'll be a process where it won't be a complete leapfrog, because I do believe in fiber. I mean, I think, going back to the hose analogy, it's a lot easier to get, hoses next to each other than sprinklers next to each other, and not have them interfere with each other. So I think that we will see increasing fiber. I believe in wired, companies that are wired. I think it's important. There was a big trend in the past that people were supposed to, operators were supposed to be pure play wireless, and now increasingly those companies that were pure play wireless, they are looking for wired technology too, or wired infrastructure too. So I think that's going to be important still. But absolutely, India, probably the first things we'll see wireless, LTE backhaul to a LTE 3G, Wi-Fi access point inside the home.
Pankaj.
So one of the biggest impediments to my experience of 4G and wireless internet is the battery life. I have a 4G phone, I charge it twice a day. How do you see it playing out, both for the wireless internet as well as the Internet of Everything?
So I think one of the biggest consumers of battery power is actually the screen. So we're trying to fix that. We have a display technology that's actually we have two different display technologies which are lower power display technologies, one of which is almost ready for prime time in the sense of color depth, and we're just working through the manufacturing issues. The other one doesn't quite have the color depth yet. It's an even more low power version. So we're really focused on that. We're also focused on just high degree of integration, doing whatever we can to turn off stuff that isn't being used. And it would surprise you, or maybe not if you look at how your phone works, but the phone is talking incessantly. And a lot of the applications that have gotten built with a mindset of the wired internet don't translate that well to the wireless internet in the sense that they create lots and lots of traffic on the network that's really not valuable. And so we're building technologies that will sort of bundle up requests together, so you just do it once and then you shut the thing off. We're doing other technologies. As an example, if you imagine that I have a watch, a smartwatch on my wrist, I might be interacting, but I'm not turning on the screen of my smartphone. I'm just using a small display on my wrist to find out, did I get a Facebook update, or did somebody text me, or who is that who's calling me? Do I really want to answer the phone, and those kinds of things. So we're trying to offload from the screen a lot. And so I think that's going to be a big thing. And then the other thing, in this small cell world where the device and the network get closer to each other because the network is so densely deployed, it just means you need to transmit less power for a given amount of data rate. So the radio will be using less power then as well.
Boy, my watch just seems so inadequate right now. All it tells is the time, but go ahead.
Yes, in the last couple of years, the whole Android ecosystem has really come on strong in the wireless device world. iOS is still pretty strong. I'm just wondering if you would be willing to make a statement about whether it's game over, or is there really going to be potentially a third major ecosystem based on either Windows, or some of the Chinese companies I know are working on their own operating systems. What do you think about that area?
I think that there is a strong desire by some elements of the industry to have more than two. And some of those players wield a lot of economic power, and so they will try over and over and over again to make that happen. And then it's going to be whether they execute well, whether they create the ecosystem around them, and it gets harder and harder for sure. And I think both Apple and Google have executed amazingly well in terms of new innovation that they put into the operating systems and the user interfaces. Whether they can keep that pace up or not is certainly for us to see in the future. Whether the operators try and change people's buying habits by their application of subsidies more in one way or another. We've seen in the industry waves of strong players. So I'm sure everybody remembers when you had to have a Motorola Razr, right? And when Nokia, you had to have the Nokia phone, or that's happened. So a lot of it is the dynamics that players, when they get strong, they say, okay, I got some leverage, now I'm going to use it, and wireless operators have long memories. So I think we've always taken the approach of don't take too much advantage when you're high, and when you're down, and you work with the partners as close as you can and try and get through that period. And I think that's the best way to do things, and I think that somebody who does that will be well received. There's a lot of initiatives. I mean, Microsoft obviously hasn't gotten as much traction as they'd hope with Windows Phone, but they'll keep at it. You got BlackBerry's trying to make a comeback right now. We'll see what happens when they bring out their phone with a keyboard on it, because that's, I think, what a lot of people are waiting to have a BlackBerry with a keyboard. There's other open source initiatives like Mozilla, which got a lot of backing from wireless operators. So, and then like you say, the Chinese companies are doing things. Amazon's kind of got their sort of fork, I guess I would say, of Android. Facebook's just doing something slightly different where they put a different user interface skin on it. I mean, there's lots of different things that are going on. So I wouldn't look at this as a static time in the industry. I think it's still quite dynamic, even though right now you just see so much momentum in Apple and Samsung right now.
Pitch. Hold on. Mike's behind you, coming.
This may require an extremely short answer, but it's likely that the tablets are going to get smaller and smaller and more useful and compete with smartphones for the thing in your pocket that you have with you a lot. Is your technology applicable to tablets? Is it used on tablets?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's a short answer. Thank you.
Yeah. No, so I think there's just going to be a continuum. And in fact, my wife uses a phone that's called a phablet because it's even bigger than a smartphone but smaller than a tablet. It's kind of sort of that size. And she loves it because it's easier for her to read and she gets more stuff on the screen. And so the trend actually that's funny is the smartphone screen sizes have been going up, the tablet screen sizes have been going down. We're kind of covering the whole range from a little tiny screen all the way up to a big TV, and who knows where it'll go from there. So yeah, our stuff's applicable across the board.
And TDMA is still underlies what you do?
TDMA technology underlies GSM, so that would be a 2G technology. CDMA is basically what was used for 3G, and then generally, this is marketing speak a little bit, so generally 4G technology is OFDMA, so it's just an alphabet soup of different ways of doing things. But we have intellectual property in all those different areas.
Who's got a question next? Okay, we got one.
Hi, regarding mobile health, I totally believe that there is a great potential in mobile health, and I know that Qualcomm has been driving the industry in mobile health for a long time through various different initiatives that you've had. But it seems to me that especially in the developed countries, and when we talk about mobile health in medical areas, that it's not a technology problem, but it's a business model, sort of legacy, status quo problem. When do you see that actually getting resolved, and so when can we actually invest in mobile health in medical area?
Yeah, so I think there'll be two paths. One will be over the top, starting from sort of the wellness area and expanding from there where the regulatory burden is light. And the other will either be stuff boomeranging back from emerging markets where it's been proven to have a success, whatever performance and benefit you get out of it, and therefore it can be proven here to our regulators. Or it will be because slowly but surely we just kind of grind away. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is it's a product called TuneNet, which is something that seems very simple. It's hard to believe that you actually need this thing. But what we used to do was with the medical device manufacturers, we would go with them and say, we're going to embed cellular connectivity into your devices. And they'd be all interested in it because everybody wanted to be connected and all these benefits I talked about in terms of connectivity. But then what they would run into the fact was there was a different pace of regulatory cycle for FCC versus FDA, and it was just, that was killing them. They couldn't actually get them to line up, and the cellular technology was revving so quickly and it just didn't work for them. And so they wanted to have something stable in their medical device. And so what we built is a hub. And it talks all these different kinds of medical radio technologies on one side, and on the other side it talks cellular. And the idea is make it really easy, prepare the medical device with the hub. Somebody goes home from the hospital, they plug it in. Generally they'll have cellular connectivity. They don't have to mess with passwords or anything to set it up. It just works. And then we'll get the information from those devices into a database, which is all, HIPAA compliant and all those kinds of things. But if you want to allow your data to be mashed up and delivered to a healthcare provider or your family member, say you're caring for an elderly parent or something, or a sick family member, you could get it, the insurer might get it if you allow that. Various people could have access to it. And so it's that kind of chipping away, just doing something that's just one small step. Maybe that's the way it'll happen. I'm not sure whether it's going to be because we prove it out somewhere else and it comes back here and gets adopted by the regulatory regime, or because we just chip away. And I think also, the FCC and the FDA have actually been talking to each other about how to work better together and deal with the fact. But we had a very early product that we worked with a partner. It was monitoring for heart arrhythmias, and you wore a thing like a Holter monitor kind of thing. It's all this stuff. They had to actually make their own PDA, because if they tried to make it connect to a standard phone, the FDA wouldn't allow that. The phone would be considered a medical device, and so they just had to build their own phone. And not a lot of people are going to do that. So we have to find a way to break that up, but it's slow, and I think these kinds of devices in developed countries might be the first things that get that done.
We have a habit of trying to end on time, and I think the thought crossed my mind, since he's headed off to give a talk at Berkeley, that we could go long just to give
First, I have to talk to an investor. So,
but I thought maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe we could be the good guys. So I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.